She heard him before she saw him. It came through the walls of the cabin like smoke through cracks, thin and wandering, the kind of sound that does not announce itself, but simply exists. The way fog exists, the way cold exists, the way loneliness exists when you have carried it long enough that it becomes part of your breathing. A man's voice, low, warm, breaking at the high notes like something rusted being bent back into a shape it had not held in years. Wren Calloway lay on the narrow bed in the narrow room that still smelled of pine shavings and lye soap, and she listened. Outside the cabin, the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia stood in autumn darkness, and the fog that rolled down their shoulders was thick enough to taste wet and mineral like licking a stone from a creek bed. She had been in this cabin for 6 hours. She had met 2 men, one of them talked enough for 3. The other had not said a single word. The other was the one singing. She knew the song. Barbara Allen. Her mother used to sing it while kneading bread in the kitchen back in Pennsylvania, flour on her forearms, 6 children underfoot, the 7th growing inside her. Wren had heard that song 1,000 times. She knew every note, every pause, every place where the melody dipped like a bird settling onto water. But she had never heard it sung like this. Not performed, not practiced. Poured out the way a wound pours when you finally stop pressing on it. She sat up. Her feet found the cold floor. She reached for the wool coat draped over the chair and pulled it around her shoulders, and then she lifted the iron latch on her door, the one Everett Hargrove had installed new that afternoon. The one that locked from the inside, the one he had tested twice to make sure it caught before he said goodnight. The cabin was dark. The fire in the main room had burned down to a red glow. She crossed the floor in bare feet, feeling the grain of the wood, and eased open the front door. The fog swallowed her immediately. It was not cold so much as damp, the kind of October night in the Blue Ridge where the air holds moisture against your skin and does not let go. The grass beneath her feet was slick. She could see perhaps 10 steps ahead, and beyond that, nothing. The mountains were gone. The sky was gone. There was only fog and the voice. She followed it. Down the slope from the cabin, past the woodpile where Everett had split a cord of oak that afternoon, past the well cover, past the first fence post of the horse paddock. The voice grew clearer with each step, not louder, clearer, as if the fog were a curtain and she was moving through it toward a lit window. The barn door was half open. A single lantern burned low inside, throwing a rectangle of amber light across the mud. She stopped at the door, looked in. He sat on a pile of straw against the far wall, his back against the rough planks, his legs stretched in front of him. Silas Drummond, 30 years old, though he looked older in the lantern light, the shadows carving his face into angles and hollows. Tall, lean dark hair tied at the back of his neck with a strip of rawhide. His right hand rested on the neck of the injured horse that lay beside him, a gray mare with a swollen foreleg, and his hand moved in slow circles, keeping time with the song. He sang with his eyes closed. His voice cracked on the high notes, broke on the word young, and he did not try to fix it. He just let the broken notes fall where they fell, like a man who has forgotten how to pretend things do not hurt. Then he opened his eyes, turned his head, and saw her standing in the doorway. The singing stopped the way a heartbeat stops. In the silence that followed, Wren saw something on his face that she would remember for the rest of her life. Not shame, not anger, not surprise, terror. The pure, uncut terror of a man who has been seen doing the one thing he believed no one would ever see. The look of a person whose hiding place has just been found, whose door has just been opened, whose darkness has just been flooded with light he did not ask for. The horse lifted its head, snorted softly, laid its head back down. Wren spoke first, quiet, not a question, a statement. "You are not mute." He did not answer. He stood. Straw fell from his coat. He crossed the barn in 4 long strides, passed within a foot of her, without looking at her, without touching her, without breathing, and walked out into the fog. Within 3 steps he was gone. Within 5, even his footsteps were gone. The fog took him the way water takes a stone. Wren stood alone in the barn doorway. The injured horse watched her with one dark eye. The lantern flickered. She did not follow him. Something in her, something old and trained and practiced, from years of standing in paddocks with frightened horses, told her, "Do not chase what is running. Stand still. Let it know you are not a threat." She stood there for a long time listening to the fog, and then she went back to the cabin and she lay down, and she did not sleep until dawn, turned the mountains blue. She did not know why he pretended to be mute. She did not know what secretus was heavy enough to silence a man for years. But she knew one thing with the certainty of a woman who had grown up reading the language of frightened animals. Whatever he was hiding, it was not small, and it was not hers to tell. Let me take you back a few hours, to the afternoon of that same day, to the moment Wren Calloway first set foot on this mountain and understood that the advertisement in the Pennsylvania newspaper had lied about almost everything. The ad had said, "Livestock Ranch in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Two brothers seek capable woman for housekeeping. Private room provided. Inquiry Hargrove, Post Office, Lexington, Virginia." Livestock ranch, that meant cattle, maybe hogs, chickens at the very least. It meant fences and barns and a road to town and neighbors within shouting distance. It meant civilization carved into the side of a mountain, rough but real. Wren had answered the ad because her father asked her to, and because she wanted to go in, because the guilt of wanting to go was easier to carry than the guilt of staying. The Calloway family lived outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania. 7 children. Wren was the eldest at 21. Her father, Hector, raised draft horses until a fall from a wagon 2 winters ago left him with a hip that would not straighten and hands that shook when the weather turned cold. Her mother, Dorothea, was 40, but looked 60, worn thin by childbirth and worry, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has never once had enough of anything. The family was not starving, but they were standing on the edge of it, and the edge was crumbling, and winter was coming. Hector Calloway was a proud man, but not a foolish one. He read the advertisements in the back of the Lancaster Intelligencer the way a drowning man reads tide charts. When the Hargrove ad appeared, he brought it to Wren at the breakfast table and set it beside her plate, without a word. That evening, after the younger children were in bed, he said, "The eldest daughter should have a life of her own before she gets buried with the rest of us." It was a kind way to say what they both knew. The bride price, whatever it turned out to be, would buy feed for the horses and medicine for the youngest and enough flour to get the family through to April. Wren was not being sold. She was being spent the way you spend your last good coin on the thing that matters most. She agreed, not happily, but she understood. What she did not tell her father, what she did not tell anyone, was the secret she carried like a coal inside her chest. She wanted to go. Not because she was brave, not because she was adventurous, because she was tired. Tired of being the eldest. Tired of cooking for 7. Tired of mending clothes she had already mended twice. Tired of sleeping in a bed she shared with 3 sisters who kicked and coughed and stole the blanket. She wanted a room with a door that locked from the inside. She wanted to wake up without hearing someone cry. She wanted for just one morning to drink a cup of coffee without a child pulling at her sleeve. And she was ashamed of wanting it. Because good daughters do not leave. Good daughters stay. Good daughters do not look at a newspaper advertisement and feel their hearts lift. 11 days by stagecoach and hired wagon. 11 days of dust and bad roads and nights in boarding houses that smelled of boiled cabbage and other people's troubles. She arrived at the base of the Blue Ridge on an October afternoon when the leaves were turning and the air tasted like wood smoke and apples. Everett Hargrove was waiting at the trailhead. He was impossible to miss. Broad shoulders, brown beard, thick enough to lose a hand, and blue eyes the color of creek water in summer. He smiled the way large men sometimes smile, wide and unguarded, the kind of smile that makes you think of unlocked doors and tables set for company. "Miss Calloway." "Yes." "Everett Hargrove. I am the one who placed the ad, and I am the one who is going to carry your bag up this hill because I promise you the hill is not going to carry itself." He took her valise without asking, slung it over one shoulder like it weighed nothing, and started up the trail talking the entire way. About the weather, about the trail, about the oak trees and how the leaves were turning early this year, about a bear he had seen last week at the creek. He talked the way some men breathe continuously and without apparent effort, and Wren realized within the first 5 minutes that Everett Hargrove was a man who was afraid of silence. The trail climbed steeply through hardwood forest, red oak and chestnut and hickory, the canopy blazing orange and crimson overhead. Wren was breathing hard by the time the trees opened onto a clearing, and then she stopped. The livestock ranch was a log cabin, 1 story, 2 rooms and a kitchen from the look of it, a porch with a roof that sagged on one side, behind it a large grassy paddock enclosed by split rail fencing, a barn weathered gray listing slightly to the east, and beyond the fence scattered across the meadow like dark stones dropped from the sky. 12 horses, wild horses, Mustangs she guessed from the way they stood, heads high, ears rotating, every muscle twitched and ready. No cattle, no hogs, no chickens, no road to town, no neighbors. Just horses, a cabin, and mountains in every direction. Everett set her valise on the porch and turned to face her with the expression of a man who knows he has been caught. "I know," he said. The ad was generous with the details. No livestock except the horses, no town within a day's ride, no church, no store, no doctor. Just this. He spread his hands. "But you are here now, and I promise nobody is going to make you stay if you do not want to." He explained the operation. He and Silas caught wild horses in the valleys below, drove them up to the mountain meadow broke, and trained them and sold them to the U.S. Army, which was always buying horses for the frontier cavalry posts out west. This year, the Army wanted 20 horses delivered to the depot at Staunton by November 20th. They had 12. 11 were coming along. The 12th, the stallion who led the herd, had not led either man within 10 feet of him in 6 months of trying. "If we do not deliver 20 horses by that date," Everett said, "the Army finds another supplier. And if the Army finds another supplier, we have no money for winter provisions. No feed, no flour, no ammunition. And this mountain gets very cold and very quiet by December." Wren was still looking at the horses when movement at the barn door caught her eye. A man stepped out of the shadow. Tall. Taller than Everett, but leaner, narrow through the shoulders and hips, built like a fence post, all vertical lines and no softness. Dark hair long tied behind his neck. A scar on his right hand, old and white, running across the knuckles and up to the wrist. And eyes the color of wood smoke, gray and distant, the kind of eyes that seemed to be looking at something behind whatever they were pointed at. He saw Wren, stopped, looked at her with an expression that was not curiosity and not hostility, but something closer to alarm, the way a wild animal freezes when it sees a hunter it did not expect. Then he looked at Everett, and his expression changed to something unmistakable. Anger. Everett still smiling. "Silas? This is Wren. She will be staying with us." Silas turned his back and walked into the barn. No nod, no greeting, no acknowledgement of any kind. Wren looked at Everett. He does not speak. Everett's voice went soft, protective, the way a man's voice goes when he is talking about someone he would take a bullet for. Mute from birth, but it is all right, he understands everything, and he is a better man than anyone I have ever known. That was yesterday. That was before the singing. That was before Wren Calloway learned in the space of one held breath in a lantern-lit barn that the silent man who would not look at her had a voice warm enough to gentle a wounded horse. Now it was morning. Silas avoided her completely. He ate breakfast on the porch before she woke. He worked at the farthest end of the paddock mending fence posts with his back to the cabin. When she walked to the well for water, he walked the other direction, not running, not hurrying, but adjusting his orbit around the property so that he was never within 30 feet of her. Wren did not pursue him. She understood the mathematics of fear, had learned them young in her father's stables. When a horse is frightened, you do not chase it. You do not call to it. You do not reach toward it. You stand still and you breathe and you wait and you let the animal come to understand on its own terms that you are not a threat. She went about her day. She swept the cabin. She organized the kitchen, which was a generous word for a plank counter, an iron stove, and 3 tin plates so dented they rocked when you set them down. She boiled coffee. She hung her 2 dresses on the pegs behind her door and set her Bible and her father's horse training journal on the windowsill. Everett noticed the change in Silas. "He is acting strange today," Everett said, standing in the kitchen while Wren scrubbed the cast iron pan. "Normally he does not avoid anyone like this. Perhaps he needs time to get used to a stranger." "Maybe?" Everett frowned. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but did not. Instead, he picked up the coffee pot and poured 2 cups, carried one out to the porch, and set it on the railing where Silas would see it when he came back from the paddock. The coffee was still there untouched when the sun went down. On the 3rd morning, Wren found it. A small wooden horse carved from pale birch, standing on the windowsill beside her Bible. 2 inches tall, every detail precise, the mane flowing back as if caught in wind, the front legs lifted mid-stride, the tail streaming behind. Whoever had carved it knew horses the way Wren knew horses, not as shapes but as living motion, muscle and bone and intention frozen in wood. No one claimed to have left it. She set the wooden horse on the table beside her bed, where it could be seen from the doorway. She did not ask. She did not say thank you aloud. She simply placed it where it was visible and left her door open during the day. That evening, from across the kitchen, she saw Silas glance through her doorway as he passed. His eyes found the wooden horse on the table. He paused for half a step so brief that if she had blinked, she would have missed it and then kept walking. The wooden horse on the table, placed where he could see it, said, "I received your message." His pause at the door said, "I know." Two people who understood that sometimes the most important conversations happen without a single word being spoken. By the end of the first week, Wren had made a decision. She was staying. Not because of the men, not because of the mountain, because of the horses. She had never seen horses like these. The Callaway horses back in Pennsylvania were draft animals, Percherons and Clydesdales, bred for patience and pulling power. Wide as wagons and gentle as dogs, these mountain horses were something else entirely. Mustangs, feral stock descended from Spanish horses that had run loose in the American wilderness for 200 years. They were smaller than draft horses, but denser, their muscles braided like rope, their eyes lit with a wildness that no amount of training could fully extinguish. 11 of the 12 had begun to accept human presence. They would eat from a bucket held at arm's length. They would tolerate a halter. They were weeks away from accepting a saddle, maybe if the work went well. But the 12th horse stood apart. Everett pointed him out on Wren's 8th day at the ranch. They stood at the paddock fence watching the herd graze in the morning fog. "That one," Everett said, "the black. You see the scar on his left flank, long straight from a mountain lion. That is Parrish." The stallion stood 50 yards from the nearest horse, head, high ears pinned back, eyes watchful. Black from nose to tail, not a single marking except the scar which ran from his shoulder to his hip, like a chalk line on a blackboard. He was not the largest horse in the herd, but he was the one the others watched. When Parrish moved, they moved. When Parrish was still, they were still. He was the lead and the herd followed him the way water follows gravity. "Silas has been working him for 6 months, Everett continued. Parrish kicked through 2 fence rails and bit him once right through the glove. He held up his own hand demonstrating. If we cannot break Parrish, the herd will not fully settle. And if the herd does not settle, we cannot deliver 20 trained horses to the Army by November." Wren looked at Parrish for a long time. She did not see a dangerous horse. She saw a horse that had been hurt and had decided that no living thing would ever get close enough to hurt him again. The pinned ears were not aggression. They were a perimeter. The watchful eyes were not hunting. They were guarding. She understood that. She had seen it before. In horses, in men, in herself. She climbed the fence. Everett grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" "I want to stand with him." "He will kick your ribs in." "No, he will not. He does not want to hurt anyone. He wants to make sure no one hurts him. Those are different things." She dropped into the paddock. No halter, no lead rope, no whip, nothing in her hands. She walked to a spot roughly 30 paces from where Parrish stood and stopped. Planted her feet, clasped her hands in front of her, and waited. Parrish snorted, stamped his right forward foot, tossed his head, and trotted away to a distance of 50 paces, stopped, turned to face her, ears still pinned. Wren did not follow. She stood. 10 minutes. The sun moved behind a cloud, came back out. 20 minutes. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow crossing the grass between them like a dark hand. 30 minutes. Wren's feet ached. Her back tightened. She breathed slowly and did not shift her weight. Everett from the fence. "You plan on standing there all day without turning if I need to." From the barn on the far side of the paddock, Silas Drummond stood in the doorway, a saddle over one arm, a mending needle in his right hand. The needle had stopped moving. His gray eyes were fixed on Wren, and for the first time since she had arrived, he was not looking away, because she was doing with the horse precisely what she had been doing with him. Waiting, not chasing, not pushing, not asking, simply being present, steady, unhurried, letting the frightened thing understand in its own time that she was not going to move. The days accumulated like snowfall. each one thin and light on its own, but together building into something that changed the shape of the ground beneath it. Day 4, Wren stood into the paddock. Parrish stood 40 paces away, 6 paces closer than yesterday. She noticed. She did not react. She tied her hair back the way she always did when she was preparing to work the small gesture that told her own body now is the time for patience. Day 7, 20 paces. Parrish's nostrils flared toward her, testing the air, reading her scent the way a blind man reads a face with his fingertips. Wren kept her hands at her sides. She did not extend them. To extend a hand was to ask the horse to make a decision, and she would not ask him to decide before he was ready. Day 10, 15 paces. Parrish stood with one hip cocked, his weight shifted to 3 legs, the fourth resting. A relaxed posture. Not relaxed because of her, not yet, but relaxed despite her, which was the first step. Day 11. Wren brought a handful of dried grass from the barn. She set it on the ground between them. Stepped back 5 paces. Parrish watched her. Watched the grass. Looked at her again. Then walked forward, lowered his head, and ate. While he chewed, he looked at her with both eyes, and for the first time, his ears were not pinned. They were forward, listening. Day 14. Rain, light at first, then heavy, the kind of mountain rain that comes sideways. Wren stood in the paddock, soaked through her hair, plastered to her neck, her dress heavy with water. Everett called from the porch for her to come inside. She shook her head. Parrish stood 10 paces away, also in the rain, facing the same direction she faced, as if they were both looking at something on the horizon that only they could see. 2 creatures, wet and stubborn, and neither one willing to leave first. Day 15. Parrish walked toward Wren. She did not move. He came closer. 8 paces. 5. 3. She could smell him now. The warm animal smell of horse and rain and grass. She could see the scar on his flank, up close white, and raised the skin pulled tight where the mountain lion's claws had torn through years ago. He walked past her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. The contact lasted less than a second. He did not stop. He kept walking, continued across the paddock, and resumed grazing 20 yards away as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Parrish had chosen to touch her. Not because she forced it, not because she bribed it, not because she cornered him or roped him or broke him down with exhaustion. He had walked into her space, offered one moment of contact, and walked away. Wren stood perfectly still, her eyes burned. A tear slid down her cheek, and she did not wipe it because wiping it would mean moving her hand, and moving her hand might mean something to the horse, who was still watching from 20 yards away. She was not crying because of the horse. She was crying because for the first time in her 21 years, something had chosen her. Not because it had to, not because it was told to, not because she was the eldest daughter and therefore the one who had to be responsible. Something wild and wounded and free had looked at her and decided on its own that she was worth walking toward. From the fence at the edge of the paddock, Silas Drummond watched. He had been coming closer to the fence each day, the same way Parrish had been coming closer to Wren. Day 1, he had watched from inside the barn through a crack in the planks. Day 7, he had stood at the barn door. Day 10, he had moved to the corner of the paddock fence. Today, he stood at the rail arms folded on the top beam, and he watched without blinking as Parrish brushed Wren's shoulder and walked on. On his face was an expression Wren had not seen before. Not fear, not avoidance. Something that lived in the territory between awe and pain. Like a man who has forgotten that the world can still do something beautiful, and is remembering it now, and finding that the remembering hurts. That evening on the windowsill beside the wooden horse, Wren found a second carving. A bird, small, round the size of a walnut, wings folded, head tilted the way wrens tilt their heads when they are listening, carved from the same pale birch as the horse with the same precise hand. Every feather suggested every angle alive. Wren held the bird in her palm and looked at it for a long time. The horse carving meant, I see you here, I do not hate you. The bird carving meant something more. Because a wren is not just any bird. A wren is her name. He had carved her. He was saying in the only language he would allow himself, I see you. She set the bird beside the horse on the windowsill, side by side, facing the same direction. The next morning, Silas passed her doorway, glanced in, saw the 2 carvings standing together, the horse and the bird companions on the sill, looking out at the same sunrise. He looked at Wren. She was standing at the stove, stirring oats, and she looked back at him without smiling, without speaking, without making it easy or hard, just looking. Silas lowered his head, not in shame, in thanks. A single dip of his chin, small and grave, the way a man nods at someone who has done him a kindness he does not believe he deserves. Then he walked on, and for the first time he did not leave the cabin when Wren was in it. 3 weeks after Wren's arrival, Everett called a meeting at the kitchen table. He laid out the numbers, the way a general lays out a battle map, and the numbers were not good. The Army wants 20 horses at Staunton by November 20th. We have 12. 11 are coming along maybe 4 weeks from saddle ready. Parrish is still not broken. We need to catch at least 8 more wild horses from the East Valley, and Silas and I cannot drive and train at the same time. Not with just 2 men. He looked at Wren. How much do you know about breaking horses? I know about training horses. I do not know about breaking them because I do not break them. What is the difference? Breaking a horse means forcing it to obey until its will gives out. Training a horse means waiting until it chooses to listen. One takes a day, the other takes weeks, but the horse you train will follow you into fire. The horse you break will throw you the first chance it gets. Everett leaned back, rubbed his beard. Parrish has had 6 months of Silas trying to break him. I know. That is why I am not trying to break him. Give me 3 more weeks. 3 weeks? That leaves 5 weeks to catch and train 8 more horses and get all 20 down the mountain to Staunton. Then we had better not waste time talking about it. Everett looked at her, and Wren saw the moment when something shifted behind his eyes. He was not looking at a house guest. He was not looking at a bride. He was looking at a person who understood work, who understood horses, and who might possibly be the reason they survived the winter. He nodded. From the corner of the kitchen, Silas sat on the floor with his back against the wall, a tin plate of cold beans untouched beside him. He had listened to everything. His face showed nothing, but his right hand resting on his knee clenched slowly into a fist, then opened, clenched and opened. The unconscious gesture he made when emotion moved through him, the phantom grip of a rifle he had not held in 10 years, tightening and releasing, as if his body remembered something. His mouth refused to speak. That night, after Everett was asleep and the fire had burned to coals, Wren lay in her bed and listened. The singing came again, faint, from the barn. A different song this time, slower, sadder. She did not recognize the melody, but she recognized the quality of it, the way the voice bent around certain syllables, like a man pressing on a bruise to make sure it still hurts. This was not a lullaby for the horse. This was a lullaby for himself. A song to put something to sleep inside him that kept waking up. She did not go outside. She lay still, eyes closed, and listened through the wall, and she thought about what she knew and what she did not know. She knew he could speak. She knew he chose not to. She knew the choice had been made long enough ago that everyone around him, including Everett, believed it was not a choice at all, but a condition of birth. She did not know why. She knew that a man does not stop speaking for 8 years because of a small wound. The wound had to be enormous. It had to be the kind of wound that makes silence feel safer than any word that could possibly come out of your mouth. The kind of wound where the thing you want to say is so terrible that saying it would destroy everything you are trying to hold together. And she knew with the bone-deep intuition of a woman who had spent her life reading the unspoken language of animals and men, that whatever Silas Drummond was holding inside his silence, it was connected to Everett. Because Silas did not avoid the world. He avoided only the world that included other people. And the person he both clung to and flinched from most was the man who called him brother. Outside, the singing went on. The fog pressed against the cabin walls. The mountains held everything, the horses and the men and the woman and the secrets, in their dark and ancient hands. On the windowsill, the wooden horse and the wooden bird stood side by side facing east, waiting for a morning that was still hours away. And somewhere in the barn, a man who had not spoken a word in 8 years sang to no one in a voice that should have been forgotten, but was not, because some things in a person cannot be killed no matter how hard they try. They can only be hidden. And hiding is not the same as gone. The weeks gathered around the cabin like rings inside a tree, each one adding a layer so thin you could not see it happening, but together building something dense and strong and impossible to undo. Wren learned the rhythms of the mountain. She learned that Everett rose before dawn and made coffee so strong it could strip paint, and that he drank it on the porch while talking to no one in particular about whatever came into his head. The weather, the price of horse meat, a dream he had about a dog he once owned. It did not matter whether anyone was listening. Everett Hargrove filled silence the way a river fills a valley, naturally and without effort, because that was what he was built to do. She learned that Silas rose even earlier, before the dark had fully lifted, and went to the barn and checked every horse, running his hands over their legs, examining their hooves, pressing his ear against their barrels, to listen to the deep machinery of their breathing. He did this every morning the way a priest says morning prayers, methodically and without variation, and he did it in absolute silence. When he was finished, he ate whatever was left from the night before standing up in the barn alone. She learned that the two men worked in a kind of wordless coordination that came from 12 years of living together. Everett would say, "We need to move the fence line east by 20 feet," and Silas would nod once and start digging post holes without any further discussion, as if the conversation had contained everything necessary and nothing more was required. They moved around each other the way planets move around a sun held in orbit by forces they never examined and never questioned. And Wren learned slowly and without anyone teaching her where she fit in the space between them. With Everett, she was easy. He was the kind of man who makes rooms feel smaller and warmer simply by being in them. He laughed at his own stories. He burned dinner with such reliable consistency that Wren took over the cooking by the third week, and he surrendered the stove with a gratitude that bordered on worship. He taught her how to cinch a saddle properly, showing her the double loop that kept the girth from slipping on the mountain trails, his big hands moving with surprising precision when they were working with leather and rope. She taught him how to make a stew that did not taste like burnt leather. "My mother was a wonderful cook," Everett told her one evening, chopping carrots with a knife that was too large for the job. "She could make a meal out of nothing, corn pone, salt pork, and whatever greens she found growing wild. But she died 2 years after the war. Fever took her in a week. I never learned a single recipe." "Your father, Mom, died before the war, logging accident. My mother raised us alone, me and my brother." He said the word brother, and something happened to his voice. Not a crack, not a break, but a thinning, as if the word had worn a groove in his vocal cords from being used too often with too much weight behind it. Wren waited. She was becoming very good at waiting. It was a Tuesday evening, 5 weeks after Wren's arrival, when Everett told the story. The three of them sat around the kitchen table. Supper was finished. The fire popped and hissed in the stove. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains were black cutouts against a sky full of stars, and the temperature was dropping toward frost. Everett had been quiet for most of the meal, which was unusual enough to make both Wren and Silas look at him twice. Now he sat with his elbows on the table and his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and he stared at the dark liquid as if reading something in it. Then he spoke. His voice was different, lower, softer, as if he were trying to tell the story quietly enough that it would not hurt as much. "I had a brother, Tobias. He was 4 years younger than me. Lost him at Shiloh, 17 years old." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a coin, small copper, dark with age. He held it between his thumb and forefinger and turned it slowly in the lamplight. "Tobias wrote me a letter every single week. Every week, no matter what. He told me about everything. His boots that had holes in them. A stray dog he found in camp that followed him everywhere. He said the dog had one ear that stood up and one that flopped down, and he called it Governor, because it looked like it was always making a speech." Everett smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. "He wrote me about the rain. He said, 'The rain here is different from rain back home, brother. It is colder and it does not smell like dirt.' He was 17 years old and he noticed how the rain smelled. He tossed the coin, caught it, looked at it. 'This is the last thing he gave me, before they split us into different units. He pressed it into my hand and said, "Hold this for me. When we meet up again, I will want it back." He put the coin back in his pocket, patted it twice the way you pat a child's head. That was April of '62. He was dead before the month was out. Different unit. Took a bullet at Shiloh. Friendly fire, they told me later. Fog was so thick that morning you could not see the man beside you. Somebody shot from the wrong direction. Could have been anyone. Could have been anyone. From the edge of the lamplight where the glow did not quite reach, Silas Drummond sat motionless. His face was turned away from the table toward the dark window in the mountains beyond. But his right hand resting on his knee, below the table where no one could see, it was clenched into a fist so tight that the old burn scar across his knuckles had gone white. The fist opened, closed, opened, closed. The ghost of a trigger being pulled again and again. Wren saw it. She saw the fist and the scar and the opening and closing, and she saw the way Silas would not turn his face toward. The light would not look at Everett, would not look at her, would not look at anything except the black window that reflected nothing back. And because she already knew that Silas could speak, and because she had spent 5 weeks watching him the way she watched Parrish, reading every shift of weight, every angle of the head, every involuntary movement of the hands, she understood now that his silence was not simply about hiding a voice. It was about hiding something he had done with that voice, something connected to fog, and to Shiloh, and to a 17-year-old boy who noticed how the rain smelled. She did not know the specifics yet, but the shape of the truth was becoming visible, the way a mountain becomes visible, through thinning fog, first as shadow, then as outline, then as something too large and too real to look away from. With Silas, there was no ease. There was only distance measured not in feet, but in the slow erosion of it, day by day, step by step, the way a creek wears down a stone. Week 1 after her arrival, he maintained a minimum of 30 feet. If she came to the well, he went to the barn. If she went to the barn, he moved to the paddock. He was not running from her. He was orbiting, maintaining a radius the way the moon maintains its distance from the earth, close enough to be held, but never close enough to touch. Week 2, 20 feet. He stopped leaving rooms when she entered them. Instead, he moved to the far wall, the far corner, the far side of the table. He still did not look at her directly, but he stopped looking away. Week 3, 10 feet. He handed her a cup of coffee one morning, not looking at her, his arm extended to its full length so that the maximum possible distance was maintained during the transfer. Their fingers did not touch. But the cup was warm and he had made it the way she liked it, weaker than Everett's with honey. He had noticed. He had been paying attention. Week 4, 5 feet, and then the afternoon in the rain. Wren was mending the east fence line, the section that bordered the steep slope down to the creek. The work was hard, driving new posts into ground that was half rock, her arms aching, her hands blistered from the hammer. The sky had been gray all morning, and at 2 o'clock it opened. Not gentle rain, mountain rain. The kind that comes so hard it feels personal, as if the sky aimed itself specifically at you and decided not to stop until you are beaten flat. Wren did not go inside. The fence post was half set, and if she left it unfinished, the first hard wind would push it over, and 3 horses would be loose on the mountain by morning. She kept hammering her dress, soaked through her hair, plastered to her face, rain running down her arms and making the hammer handle slick. She did not hear him approach. He was quiet the way cats are quiet, his feet finding the gaps between sounds. One moment she was alone in the rain, and the next moment there was a weight on her shoulders, a heaviness that was not rain, and she looked up to find a canvas tarp draped over her back. Silas stood beside him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the fence post, as if the tarp had simply appeared on her shoulders by coincidence, and he happened to be standing nearby by chance. The tarp had been his, the one he wore across his shoulders when he worked outside in weather, and it was warm with his body heat, and it smelled of horse and wood smoke and the particular dry musk of a man who works outdoors in all seasons. He turned and walked back toward the barn, in the rain, without the tarp. She watched him go, watched the rain hit his shoulders and soak through his shirt in seconds, watched him not hurry, not run, not look back. He walked through the rain, the way he walked through everything, with the slow deliberation of a man who does not believe he deserves shelter. Wren stood beneath his tarp, warm and dry from the chest up, soaked from the waist down, and she held the edges of the canvas with both hands, and she did not cry, though something behind her sternum had shifted position and was pressing against her lungs in a way that made breathing a conscious decision rather than an automatic one. That was how mountain men said, "I care about you," not with words, not with flowers, not with declarations made in parlors or promises written in ink, with canvas and warmth and walking away wet so that someone else could stay dry. That evening, the rain stopped and the 3 of them ate supper together at the table. Everett was telling a story about a bear he had seen at the creek that morning. Big as this table, I swear on my mother's grave, big as this table. Maybe bigger. It was standing in the water looking at me like I owed it money, and I said to myself, Everett, either you walk backward very slowly, or you become bear supper, and I chose the first option. From across the table, Silas looked at the ceiling and slowly shook his head. The universal gesture of a man who has heard this story before and knows the bear was not as big as the table. Wren laughed. It was not a polite laugh, not the kind she had learned to produce in social situations back in Pennsylvania, the gentle ha 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 that women were expected to perform when men made jokes. It was a real laugh, unexpected, the sound escaping before she could catch it, and it surprised all three of them. Silas looked at her, not at the wall behind her, not at the table in front of her. At her. His gray eyes met her blue ones, and the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, not quite. A tectonic shift, small and seismic. The left side of his mouth lifted by perhaps a 16th of an inch, held for perhaps a quarter of a second, and then settled back to its resting position. But Wren saw it, and she saw Everett see it. Everett's eyes went wide. He looked at Silas the way a man looks at a sunset that is doing something it has never done before. Did you just smile? I have been telling you stories for 12 years, and I have never once seen you smile, and now you smile. Silas looked back at his plate. The quarter second was over. Whatever door had cracked open had closed again. But it had been open. Everyone at the table knew it had been open, and everyone at the table knew that it was the woman sitting between them who had opened it. On a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after Wren's arrival, Everett came back from the North Trail with a face like a closed door. Boot prints, he said, and horse tracks. 4 animals all shod. Somebody has been watching us. 2 days later, one of the horses was missing. The weakest in the herd, a bay mare with a crooked foreleg, the easiest to catch and the simplest to lead away quietly. The fence had been cut in the northeast corner, the wire snipped with pliers, the post left standing, so that from a distance everything looked normal. Everett examined the cuts. His jaw was tight. Not amateurs. They waited until the mare was grazing alone, cut the fence behind her, led her through, and fixed the wire just enough to fool a quick glance. These are men who have stolen horses before. 4 days after that, a second horse disappeared. Same method, same northeast corner. 12 horses had become 10. They needed 20 by November 20th. The math was getting worse. Brig came on a Thursday. Wren was in the paddock with Parrish. Progress had continued slow and steady, the geometry of trust measured in decreasing distance. Parrish now stood 4 paces from her, close enough that she could see the individual hairs of his black coat, close enough that she could hear the wet sound of his breathing. He had not yet allowed her to touch him, but he no longer moved away when she shifted her weight. She heard the horses before she saw the men. The sound of shod hooves on the rocky trail, multiple animals moving in a group. Parrish's head came up, his ears flattened. He trotted to the far side of the paddock and stood with his hindquarters toward the approaching sound, ready to run or kick. 5 men appeared at the edge of the clearing. Horses, lathered clothes, worn through rifles slung carelessly across saddle pommels. They had the look of men who had been living outdoors for longer than they had planned, the particular sunburned, hollow-cheeked appearance of people who eat when they find food and sleep when exhaustion forces the issue. The man in front dismounted. He was 40, perhaps older, with a face that might have been handsome once, but had been weathered and creased and hardened by something beyond weather. He removed his hat and held it against his chest, a gesture of courtesy that was so precisely performed, it felt practiced the way a card player performs courtesy before dealing a hand from the bottom of the deck. "Good morning, miss. My name is Amos Brigg. My friends and I are travelers, lost our way in the mountains. Would you be kind enough to spare us some water and perhaps a bit of hardtack?" Everett came from the barn, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. He looked at the 5 men, counted their guns, assessed their horses, and made the calculation that every man in the mountains makes when strangers appear, threat, nuisance, or neutral. "Water is free, food we can spare a little. You are welcome to rest here, but not long." Brigg nodded. His eyes moved across the property the way a buyer's eyes move across merchandise. The horses, the fence line, the cabin, the barn, counting, measuring, evaluating. Then his eyes reached the barn door and they stopped. Silas stood in the doorway. He had come out at the sound of the approaching horses, and he stood now in the half-shadow, one hand on the doorframe, his body very still. Briggs stared at him. His expression changed, not surprise exactly. Recognition, the way you recognize a face in a photograph you have not looked at in years. Then he smiled. The smile unfolded slowly across his face like something being unwrapped, and there was nothing warm in it. "Silas Drummond, my lord, how many years has it been?" Silas did not move. His right hand, the one with the burn scar, gripped the doorframe hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Briggs turned to Everett, still smiling. "Your friend here and I served in the same unit. Union Army, Shiloh. April of '62. Hard times. A great many things happened in the fog that morning that men would rather not discuss." He looked back at Silas. "Is that not right, Silas?" The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the silence of a room in which someone has said something that changes the air pressure, that makes the walls feel closer and the ceiling feel lower. Wren, still standing in the paddock with Parrish behind her, watched the three men and read their bodies the way she read horses. Everett stood straight, rifle still pointed down his face, showing the wariness of a man who does not understand what he is seeing, but knows he does not like it. Silas stood frozen. Not the stillness of calm, the stillness of a man who has stopped breathing. Briggs stood loose, relaxed, his hat still in his hand, his smile still in place, radiating the particular comfort of a man who holds a weapon and knows it. Except Briggs' weapon was not a rifle. It was a sentence. A sentence he had not yet spoken, but could speak at any time, and everyone in that clearing understood this without it needing to be said. "Thank you for the water," Briggs said. He put his hat back on. "We are camped nearby, a day's ride east. If you need anything, send word." He mounted. His men followed. They rode out of the clearing at a walk, unhurried, the way men leave when they intend to come back. Everett watched them go, then turned to Silas. "You know that man." Silas nodded once. "He knows something about you." Silas did not move. "What does he know, Silas?" No response. Silas turned and walked into the barn, and the sound of the door closing was the only answer Everett received. Briggs returned a week later. Alone, he rode into the clearing at midday, dismounted, and stood by the water trough as if he owned it. Everett met him with the rifle this time, carried at hip level, pointed in Briggs' general direction. "You have two of our horses," Everett said. "I have no idea what you mean." "The bay mare with the crooked foreleg, the roan gelding with the white blaze. Both gone from our herd, both taken through a cut fence on the northeast line." Briggs held up his hands, palms out, the picture of innocence. Then he dropped the act. His face went flat, the courtesy peeled away like bark from a dead tree, and underneath was something tired and hard and practical. "3 horses, that is the price. You give me 3 horses, I leave this mountain, and I never come back. Get off my land." "I would recommend asking Silas first." Briggs raised his voice slightly, making sure it would carry to the barn, where Silas stood in the shadow of the doorway. "He has a particular reason to want me gone quickly. He has a very particular reason to want me as far from this mountain as possible." He looked directly at Silas, spoke slowly. "You remember what happened in the fog, Silas. I remember it too. I remember you were not mute that morning. I remember your voice very clearly. You shouted, 'Hold fire,' but it was a little late." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on the people inside it. Briggs tipped his hat. 3 horses. Think about it. I will be back." He rode away. Everett stood in the clearing, rifle still at his hip, and watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then he turned to Silas. "What does he know about you?" Silas shook his head, walked into the barn, closed the door, but Everett did not follow. He stood in the clearing, and Wren, watching from the cabin window, saw something on his face she had not seen before. Not anger, not confusion, doubt. The first seed of it, small and dark, planted in the soil of 12 years of trust. That night, Wren went to the barn. She found Silas sitting in the back stall, in the dark, his hand resting on Parrish's neck. The stallion lay beside him on the straw, breathing slowly, his massive body radiating heat in the cold October air. Parrish had begun allowing Silas to sit near him in the weeks since Wren's arrival, a kind of borrowed trust, as if the horse had looked at Wren and looked at Silas and decided that anyone Wren allowed close was worth tolerating. Wren sat down 3 paces away, did not speak immediately. Let the silence be the first thing they shared, the way you let a fire burn down before you put new wood on it. Then she spoke, quietly. I know you are not mute. I have known since the first night. I have not told Everett. I will not tell him. Silence. Parrish's breathing slow and deep, the creak of the barn walls in the wind. But that man, Brigg, he knows something that frightens you. And I cannot help if I do not know what it is. She waited. 1 minute. 2. Long enough that she thought he would simply sit in silence until she left the way he had done every other time she had come too close to the center of him. But he did not leave. And he did not stay silent, not exactly. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He leaned forward and picked up a stick from the straw-scattered floor, and he began to draw. In the packed dirt beneath the straw, he drew lines. Simple, careful, each one deliberate. First waves, undulating lines across the ground covering the space between them like a fog made of dirt. Then on one side of the ones, a row of small vertical marks. Men, standing in a line, facing forward. Then on the other side, another row of vertical marks. More men, facing the first group. Then from the first group, a line extending forward. Not a man, a trajectory, a bullet. Then in the second group, one of the vertical marks falling. Horizontal now, on the ground. Silas looked at the drawing, looked at Wren, then scraped his boot across the dirt, erasing everything. Lines, men, bullet, body, all of it gone, smeared back into blank earth. He stood, walked out of the barn. Wren sat in the dark with Parrish and looked at the erased ground and understood he had shot someone. In the fog, in the war, friendly fire. She did not yet know who, but she did not leave either. She sat in the dark barn for a long time, long enough that her breathing slowed and the cold settled into her bones, and then she did something she had not planned. She began to talk, not to Silas because Silas was gone, to the empty barn, to Parrish, to the dark. Do you want to know why I came here? Parrish shifted his weight, breathed. My father told everyone that the eldest daughter deserves a life of her own. That was the version for company. The real version is that my family needed the bride money to survive the winter. 6 younger children, a mother who has not slept a full night in 15 years, a father who cannot hold a hammer without shaking. She pulled her knees to her chest. But there is a version even my father does not know. The version I have never told anyone. She was speaking to no one. She was sure she was speaking to no one. I wanted to leave, not for the money, not for the family, for me. I wanted to stop being the eldest daughter. I wanted a room with a door that locks. I wanted to drink a cup of coffee without someone pulling at my sleeve. I wanted to be someone other than the person who stays. Her voice was barely a whisper now. And every day I have been ashamed of that, because good daughters do not want to leave. Good daughters stay and suffer and never admit that they are drowning. Silence. Then from the far end of the barn, so faint she almost did not hear it, the sound of someone shifting position in the straw. The slight creak of a boot on wood. Silas had not left. He had walked to the barn door, but had not gone through it. He was standing in the darkness at the far end, invisible, silent, and he had heard everything. She did not turn around. She did not react. She simply sat with her hands around her knees and let the confession hang in the cold air between them. And then she heard him come back. Not to where he had been sitting, but closer. Not 3 paces away, 2 paces. Close enough that in the darkness she could feel the air change when he breathed. He sat down. She heard the straw compress under his weight. She smelled wood smoke and horse and the faint, dry smell of birch shavings from his carving. He did not speak. He did not draw. He simply sat 2 paces away in the dark, breathing. 2 people carrying guilt they had never spoken aloud, sitting in a barn with a horse who trusted neither of them fully, but was learning sitting in darkness, because some confessions can only happen when you cannot see each other's faces, because the dark makes honesty possible, the way distance makes it safe. Wren said very softly, "We are the same, are we not? Both of us locked inside something we did, or something we wanted." No answer. But he did not leave, and that was enough. Parrish shifted between them, his great warm body a bridge of bone and muscle, and the 3 of them sat in the barn while the Blue Ridge Mountains held their breath outside, and no one said another word, and no one needed to. But if Wren was learning to read Silas, she was also learning that Everett was becoming harder to read. The change was subtle. It did not announce itself. It crept in the way cold creeps into a cabin, through the gaps between logs, slowly and visibly, until one morning you notice your breath making clouds and realize the temperature has been dropping for days. Everett still talked, still laughed, still told stories about bears and broken saddles and the time a quartermaster's horse ate an entire bag of mail. But something behind the stories had shifted. He watched Silas differently now. He watched Wren differently. And he watched them together with an expression that was not jealousy, not exactly, but something in the same family, a cousin of jealousy, living in the house next door. It came out on a gray afternoon 8 days after Briggs' second visit. Silas had gone to check the trap lines in the East Valley, a full day's work. Everett and Wren were alone for the first time in weeks. They were splitting firewood behind the cabin, Wren holding the logs steady, while Everett swung the axe, a rhythm they had developed that required no discussion: lift and hold and swing and split, lift and hold and swing and split. On the 15th log, Everett stopped, set the axe head on the ground, leaned on the handle. "I need to tell you something." Wren waited. She had become very good at waiting. "I have lived with Silas Drummond for 12 years. I found him at Shiloh after the worst morning of the war. They had him in front of a military tribunal for friendly fire for shooting into his own line during the fog. Half the unit wanted him hanged. I stood up and testified that in fog, that thick, any man alive would have fired. They let him go. I took him with me for the rest of the war. When it was over, I brought him up here." He was not looking at Wren. He was looking at the woodpile, or maybe past it at something 12 years gone. 12 years. I have cooked for him, built with him, talked to him every single day, even though he has never once answered. 12 years of my voice going into his silence like water into sand. I have defended him to every person who has ever asked why I live with a mute. I have told them he is the best man I have ever known, and I have meant it every single time." He paused, picked up a wood chip, turned it in his fingers. "And then you arrived, 2 months ago, and he looks at you the way he has never once looked at me." The wood chip snapped between his fingers. "I am not jealous. I am not that kind of man, and I do not want you to think I am. But I need you to understand something. I gave him 12 years, 12 years of talking to a wall, and you gave him 2 months of silence, and somehow that was the thing that got through." He threw the broken chip into the woodpile. Wren spoke carefully. "He does look at you, Everett, every day. You just do not see it because you are too busy looking the other way." "What does that mean?" "You protect Silas. You speak for Silas. You decide things for Silas. You love him, and I do not doubt that for a second. But you love him the way a man loves something he is responsible for. You have never looked at him as someone who is your equal. You look at him as someone who needs saving, and those are two different things." Everett turned to face her. His blue eyes were bright, not with anger, but with the shock of recognition, the particular pain of hearing a truth you have known for years but never allowed yourself to articulate. "I lost my brother," he said, "at Shiloh, Tobias. He was 17. After that, keeping Silas alive was the only thing that made the loss survivable. If I could save one person, if I could keep one person from dying, then maybe it was not all for nothing." He picked up the axe, set a new log, swung. The log split clean down the center, the two halves falling away from each other like the covers of a book. "Maybe you are right. Maybe I have been so busy saving him that I forgot to see him." He swung again, another clean split. "But seeing him is what you do, and I am not certain I know how to do anything else." The days shortened. October was dying. The deadline pressed closer with each frost. 10 horses in the paddock, 20 needed by November 20th. Parrish still untouched, still leading the herd from a distance, still watching Wren with ears that were forward now instead of pinned, which was progress, but progress measured in degrees rather than miles. Brigg had not returned, but his presence hung over the ranch the way storm clouds hang over a valley, not raining yet, but heavy and dark and full of something that had not yet been released. Silas found the camp, 2 hours north on foot in a hollow where a creek met a rock face and created a natural shelter. 5 men, 5 horses, cold fire pits showing regular use. They were not hiding their presence anymore. They were establishing it the way an army establishes a forward position before an advance. Everett counted ammunition, checked the rifles, told Wren that if she heard strange noises at night, she was to bolt her door and stay on the floor below the window line. Wren that evening took the butcher knife from the kitchen and wrapped it in a cloth and placed it under her pillow. She did not tell anyone, and she began teaching Parrish a signal. Each afternoon when she stood in the paddock, she added a sound, a low whistle, 2 notes descending the same call her father had used with the Callaway draft horses back in Pennsylvania. The whistle meant come. It meant follow. It meant I am the one you trust and I am asking you to move. Parrish did not respond the first day, or the second. On the third day when Wren whistled, Parrish's ears turned toward her. On the 5th day, he took one step in her direction before stopping. She did not know why she was teaching him this. She did not have a plan. She had instinct, which is what people call a plan that has not yet revealed its shape. The night was thick, no moon, no stars. The fog had come in from the valleys like a living thing crawling up the mountain slopes and pooling around the cabin until the world shrank to the size of the lamplight and everything beyond it was gone. Wren lay in her bed with the butcher knife under her pillow and the wooden horse and the wooden bird on her windowsill and the sound of Everett snoring from the next room and the particular silence that meant Silas was in the barn awake watching. She did not hear the singing tonight. For the first time in weeks, the barn was quiet. Something else was not quiet. She could not have said what. Not a sound exactly. A feeling the way animals feel a storm before the first cloud appears, the way horses will not cross a bridge they have crossed 100 times if something underneath has shifted. She lay still, listened. The fog pressed against the window glass. The mountains held their breath. Somewhere out in the darkness, 5 men were making a decision. And the decision was almost made. They came in the fog. Of course they did. Fog was where this story began 12 years ago on a field in Tennessee, where 2 lines of men who fought for the same flag pointed rifles into white blindness and fired at sounds they could not see. Fog was the medium through which the original sin had traveled the bullet that killed a 17-year-old boy who noticed how rain smelled, and now fog was the medium through which the consequence arrived climbing the Blue Ridge Mountains on an October night when the moon was hidden and the stars were drowned, and the world had been reduced to the space between one breath and the next. Wren heard them before she understood what she was hearing. The sounds came through the fog like fish through muddy water, shapeless and dark. A horse snorting muffled. The clink of metal on metal, a buckle or a rifle sling. Footsteps on wet grass, careful but not careful enough. The kind of quiet that advertises itself as not quite quiet enough. She sat up, reached under her pillow, found the butcher knife wrapped in its cloth. From the next room, the sound of Everett's snoring stopped abruptly, the way a man's breathing stops when his body registers danger before his mind does. She heard the creak of his bed, the heavy sound of his boots hitting the floor, the metallic click of a rifle bolt. Then Everett's voice, low and hard. "Somebody is out there." The cabin door opened and closed. Wren pressed her back against the wall beside her window and looked out through the glass, but the fog gave her nothing. White, dense, absolute. She could see the porch railing and 2 feet of grass beyond it, and after that the world ended. Then she heard the sounds she had been dreading. Not from outside, from multiple directions. Voices quiet but no longer trying for silence, in the movement of bodies through the paddock fence, and the nervous stamping of horses who smell strangers in the dark. A shout from the porch. Everett's voice full volume now. "Get off my land." The sound of impact, not a gunshot, bodies colliding, a grunt, the crash of something hitting the porch rail. Then another impact and another, in the particular wet sound of a fist meeting flesh. Everett was strong. Wren had watched him split logs with 3 swings that would have taken most men 6. But strength is arithmetic, and 2 men are more than 1, and in the dark, in the fog, with no time to aim and no room to swing, Everett Hargrove went down. Silas was in the barn when they came. He had been sitting with Parrish in the back stall, the way he did most nights, his hand on the stallion's neck, listening to the great animal breathe. Parrish had been letting Silas sit closer these past weeks, a gradual acceptance built not on Silas earning the horse's trust directly, but on a kind of transitive property. Parrish trusted Wren. Wren was near Silas. Therefore, Silas was tolerable. It was not love. It was geometry. When Silas heard the sounds from the cabin, he moved. Not toward the cabin, toward the paddock gate. His first instinct, trained by years of living with horses, was to open the gate and drive the herd into the forest, scatter them into the foin where no one could catch them, because a horse thief cannot steal what is not there. He reached the gate, got his hands on the latch, and a voice came out of the pond behind him, tired and flat and familiar. "3 horses, Silas. That was all I asked for last time. You should have taken the deal." Amos Briggs stepped out of the white nothing and stood 10 feet away. He was not holding a weapon. His hands were at his sides, his hat pushed back on his head, his face showing the particular exhaustion of a man who would rather be anywhere else but has run out of places to go. "I did not want it to come to this. I told you the price, 3 horses, and I disappear. You chose to ignore me, so now the price has changed." Silas stood at the gate, hands on the latch body, very still. "All of them," Briggs said. "Every horse on this mountain. My men will drive them down to the valley. We sell them to a trader in Staunton. 5 men, 10 horses, enough money to get through 2 winters. That is the new arrangement." From somewhere near the cabin, the sounds of struggle had stopped. Everett was down, held down. The night was full of smoke and the heavy breathing of men doing ugly work. Briggs took a step closer. "And if you try to stop me, I will tell Hargrove what you did at Shiloh. Not just that you can speak Silas, not just that you have been lying to him for years about being mute." Briggs' voice dropped almost gentle. "I will tell him about his brother." Silas closed his eyes. His right hand released the gate latch and curled into a fist at his side, the old reflex, the phantom rifle grip and grip and release. "I was there that morning, Silas. I saw what happened in the VUM. I heard you shout, 'Hold fire,' but the bullets were already gone. And I saw you run to the boy afterward. I saw you hold him while the fog lifted and you realized what you had done. I know the boy's name. Tobias Hargrove, 17 years old. Same last name as the man you call brother." The fog moved between them like something alive. "So here is how this works. You step away from that gate. My men take the horses, and your secret stays buried. Everyone walks away alive and with whatever peace they can manage." Silas stood motionless. The fog on his face was indistinguishable from sweat. His eyes were still closed, and behind the closed lids something was happening that Briggs could not see, and Wren, crouching in the dark of the barn 15 feet away, could only feel the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm breaks. Wren had come to the barn through the back door, the one that opened onto the steep slope behind the building. When the sounds of the attack began, she had not stayed in the cabin. She had taken the butcher knife, slipped out the by window of her room, circled through the fog along the tree line, and come in through the barn's rear entrance, the one she had learned existed during her weeks of working with Parrish, the one she knew led directly to the paddock gate on the far side. She was crouched behind a stack of hay bales near the back stall. She heard every word Briggs said. She heard his brother. She heard Tobias Hargrove. And the drawing on the barn floor came back to her with the force of a physical blow. The fog lines, the 2 groups of men, the bullet, the falling figure. Silas had shot Tobias in the fog. Friendly fire, the boy Everett talked about every night before sleep, the boy whose letters he could recite from memory, the boy whose last coin Everett carried in his shirt pocket and touched like a rosary. Silas had killed Everett's brother, and he had not spoken a word in 8 years because the thing he most needed to say was the one thing that would destroy the only person who had ever saved him. Wren pressed her hand against her mouth. Tears ran down her face and into her fingers. She did not make a sound. Outside, Briggs' men were moving toward the paddock. She could hear them on the other side of the fence, 2 of them at least working the gate on the east side, preparing to drive the horses out and down the mountain trail. One of them was coming toward the barn. She heard his boots on the gravel path, heard him reach the barn door, heard the scrape of the door sliding open, saw the orange flicker of a torch sweeping across the interior, throwing wild shadows against the walls, illuminating the hay bales, the tack hanging from hooks, the empty stalls, and coming closer, swinging toward the back stall, where Wren crouched behind the hay with a butcher knife in one hand and the other hand pressed against her mouth. 3 seconds. The torchlight moved along the floor, reached the edge of the hay bale, In 2 more seconds, the man would step around the bale and see her. The sound that came out of Silas Drummond was not a word at first. It was something older than language, something that came from a place in the body that words cannot reach, a place where 8 years of compressed silence had been stored under pressure so enormous that when it broke everything around it. Do not go in there. 4 words, English. Spoken in a voice that was rust and gravel, and something breaking like a nail being pulled from wood that has held it for a decade. Not a whisper, not a murmur, a shout, a roar, a sound so loud that it bounced off the rock face behind the barn and echoed down the valley and came back altered as if the mountains themselves were repeating it in disbelief. Every living thing within earshot froze. The man in the barn doorway stopped. The torch wavered in his hand. His head turned toward the sound, away from the hay bale, away from Wren. Briggs spun around, and on his face was genuine shock, the first uncontrolled expression Wren had seen him make. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes widened. From the porch of the cabin, where Everett lay on his back with 2 men holding his arms, there was a sound like a man being punched in the chest by a ghost. Everett's voice, barely a whisper, cracked in disbelieving. Silas. Briggs recovered first. He looked at Silas, and something that might have been admiration or might have been pity crossed his face. Well, he said, there it is. 12 years I kept that secret for you, Silas. The voice, the fact that you could speak, and now you have broken it open yourself. He shook his head slowly. I truly wish you had just given me the horses. But the moment was fracturing. The man in the barn doorway had turned fully towards Silas, his torch pointing away from the interior. And Wren, whose body had been trained by 21 years of working with the animals to recognize the exact instant when a situation shifts from frozen to fluid, moved. She ran, not toward the front of the barn, toward the back, through the rear door into the fog around the side of the building, her bare feet finding the wet grass and the rocks and the roots by memory, by the map her body had built during weeks of walking this ground in daylight. She came around the barn to the paddock fence, found the main gate, the one Silas had been standing at before Briggs stopped him. She put both hands on the latch, lifted, swung the gate wide. Then she put her fingers to her lips and whistled. 2 notes, descending. The call she had been teaching Parrish for 2 weeks, the call her father used with the Callaway horses, the sound that meant come follow, trust me. For 1 terrible second, nothing happened. The fog was too thick. The horses were panicked, stamping and snorting in the paddock, smelling the strange men, sensing the violence in the air. Parrish was somewhere in the white darkness, invisible. Then she heard hooves, heavy, fast, coming toward her. Parrish appeared out of the barn like something born from it, black and massive, his scar a white line on his flank, his eyes wide. He saw the open gate. He saw Wren standing beside it. He heard the whistle still echoing between the mountains. And he ran, through the gate, into the forest. And behind him, following the way, they always followed the way. Water follows gravity, the entire herd. 10 horses thundering through the open gate past Renmont, into the trees, into the fog, into the Blue Ridge night where no man on earth was going to catch them. Briggs' men tried. They ran after the horses, crashing through brush, tripping on roots, shouting at each other in the darkness. But you do not catch wild horses in mountain fog at night. You do not catch them because they were born in this darkness, reside on these slopes, and they know every rock and every root item and every path, and you do not. In the chaos, Everett threw off the 2 men holding him. They had loosened their grip when the horses bolted, distracted by the thunder of hooves and the shouts of their companions. And Everett Hargrove was not a man who needed much of an opening. He drove his elbow into the nearest face, rolled to his feet, and grabbed his rifle from where it had fallen on the porch. Silas stood in the clearing between the barn and the cabin, hands empty, no weapon, his chest heaving, his throat raw from the first words it had produced in 8 years. Wren came around the side of the barn, breathing hard, the butcher knife still in her hand, her feet muddy and bleeding from the rocks she had crossed in the dark. 3 people, 2 rifles. The fog was thinning. Briggs' men were scattered in the forest chasing horses they would never catch. Briggs stood alone in the clearing. He looked at Silas, at Wren, at Everett, with the rifle at the empty paddock where 10 horses had been 60 seconds ago. He calculated. He was a practical man. He had always been a practical man. He raised his hands. All right. He looked at Silas for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The threat was gone. The leverage was gone. What remained was something unexpected and quiet, something that sounded almost like recognition. 12 years ago, I heard you scream in that fog. You screamed, "Hold fire." But it was too late. He paused. I screamed the same thing once. 2 years later, different battle, different fog, but I did not make it in time either. He picked up his hat from the ground where it had fallen. I am not a bad man, Silas. I am just a man who lost the reason to stay quiet. He turned, walked to his horse, mounted, rode into the fog without looking back, and the fog took him the way it takes everything completely and without remainder. The cabin, the fire, the silence. 3 people sitting in the space where warmth meets shadow, and the shadow was winning. Everett sat at the table. His lower lip was split from the fight on the porch. His knuckles were raw. His blue eyes, normally the color of summer creek water, were the color of winter. Cold and flat and waiting. He looked at Silas, who sat across from him with his head bowed, his dark hair hanging forward, his scarred hands flat on the table surface, as if he needed to feel something solid beneath them. You can speak. Not a question, a statement made from the rubble of 12 years of belief. You have always been able to speak. Silas raised his head, nodded once. How long? Silas opened his mouth. The words came out the way water comes from a pipe that has been frozen and is thawing in bursts, and stops each syllable a small violence against the silence that had held it. Since Shiloh. His voice was gravel over rust, low and rough and cracked at every edge. But not right after. I still spoke. For 2 years after I still spoke. A little less each month. But I spoke. He stopped. Breathed. You and I came up this mountain in the spring of '65. And that first winter you started talking about Tobias. Every night. His letters. His dog with one wide ear up. The rain that smelled different, and his right hand curled on the table. Opened, curled, opened. Every story you told about him was another bullet, and I could not tell you to stop because you needed to tell them, and I could not listen without drowning. So I stopped talking, at first just to you, then to everyone. By the second winter, I had not spoken a word in months, and you told strangers I had been mute from birth, and it was easier to let you believe that than to explain why. He looked at Everett directly for the first time. I stopped talking because every word I wanted to say would have ended with the truth, and the truth would have destroyed you. Everett's voice was very steady. What truth? The fire cracked, a log shifted, sending a small fountain of sparks up the chimney. The cabin walls creaked in the wind. Wren sat in the corner near the stove, her hands gripping the fabric of her skirt so tightly that her knuckles matched the color of the wood smoke drifting above them. Silas spoke, each word placed down like a stone being laid in a wall, carefully, precisely, with the understanding that once placed, it could never be moved. In the fog, at Shiloh, my unit was positioned on the left flank. We heard movement ahead, saw shapes in the white, no uniforms visible, no colors, just shapes. He stopped, his hand clenched on the table. I fired, 3 rounds, others fired 2. But I fired 3 rounds, and one of them hit a man. I ran forward. The fog was lifting. I reached the man I had shot. Stopped, longer this time. The silence in the cabin was the kind of silence that has texture, that presses against your skin, that makes the air thick enough to chew. He was young, a boy, Union, our side. He had gotten separated from his unit and wandered into our line of fire. His voice broke, not cracked. Broke. The way a beam breaks when the weight it has been holding finally exceeds what it was built to bear. He died in my hands. The fog lifted, and I saw his face. He was 17 years old. The fire popped. Wren's tears fell silently into her lap. His name was Tobias. Nothing. No sound, no movement, no breathing. The fire itself seemed to pause, the flames holding still, as if even the heat understood that what had just been said could not be unsaid, and the world needed a moment to absorb the weight of it. Everett did not shout, he did not swing, he did not cry. He did something worse. He stood up, slowly, the way a man stands when the ground beneath him has become a place he no longer recognizes. He looked at Silas, and his face showed nothing. Not anger, not grief, not betrayal, but the absolute blankness of a man whose internal machinery has seized every gear, jammed every spring, broken the entire apparatus of thought and feeling, locked in a position it was never designed to hold. Then he moved towards Silas. One step, two. He stood directly in front of the man who had been his ruthless brother for 12 years, the man he had saved from a military tribunal, the man he had carried up this mountain and fed and sheltered and spoken to every day for over a decade, even though the speaking was never answered. His right hand rose, slowly. The fist was enormous, scarred across the knuckles from years of wood and stone and wire. It drew back to his shoulder, held there, trembling. Silas did not flinch. He looked up at the fist, and he did not close his eyes, and he did not turn away. His expression said what his voice no longer could: hit me. I have earned it. I have been waiting for it for 12 years. 5 seconds. 10. The fist trembled at Everett's shoulder like a bird on a wire in a high wind. Then slowly, finger by finger, the fist opened. The fingers uncurled like petals. The palm flattened. And Everett lowered his open hand and placed it on the top of Silas's head, gently, briefly, the way a man touches the head of a younger brother for the last time before walking out a door. Then he lifted his hand, turned, walked to the cabin door, opened it, stepped into the fog, and was gone. Silas put his face on the table and wept. The sound was worse than the silence. It was the sound of a dam breaking after 12 years of holding back water, a deep, wrenching animal sound that shook his shoulders and bent his spine and filled the small cabin with more grief than its walls were built to contain. From outside, Parrish, standing at the paddock fence where he had returned after the chaos of the night, raised his head and called out a high, sharp whinny that cut through the pine and the weeping in the wind. The horse who trusted almost no one on earth was calling to the man who sat inside, broken, because even an animal knows the sound of pain, and even an animal responds to it. Wren did not move. She sat in her corner and let her tears fall, and she did not go to Silas, and she did not go after Everett, because there are moments when the only kind thing you can do for people who are drowning is to not pretend you can save them. You can only sit on the shore and be there when they crawl out. 2 days. Everett did not come back to the cabin. He camped at the far edge of the meadow on a flat rock overlooking the valley where the fog gathered each morning and burned away by noon. He had taken a blanket and nothing else. No food, no rifle, just the blanket and the coin. Each night, Wren heard the sound of the coin being thrown. Not tossed and caught the way Everett had always done, the gentle ritual of a man communing with a memory. Thrown, hard, the sharp crack of copper hitting stone. Then silence. Then the sound of boots on rock searching. Then silence again. Then another throw. He was trying to throw it away and could not. He was trying to let go of the last piece of Tobias, and his hands would not allow it. Silas did not eat. Wren brought food to the barn, where he had not moved from the back stall. She set the plate inside the door and left. In the morning, the plate was untouched. She brought it back, emptied it, refilled it, brought it again untouched. On the second morning, she stopped bringing plates and simply left a canteen of water and a piece of bread on the ground and walked away. Parrish stood outside the barn. He had not left. The other horses had scattered into the forest during the raid and were drifting back in ones and twos, reappearing at the paddock fence like children returning home after a storm. But Parrish had never left. He stood at the barn door as if standing guard, his black body motionless, his ears forward, his dark eyes watching the interior, where Silas sat in the straw and stared at nothing. On the second morning, Wren went to the barn and found it empty. Not empty of horses, empty of Silas. She ran to the cabin. His pack was gone. The old army rucksack he kept in the corner, the one with the faded canvas and the broken buckle, was missing. His knife was missing. His coat was missing. On the table beside Wren's bed, where the wooden horse and the wooden bird had stood side by side for weeks, she found them rearranged. Silas had placed them together, touching, facing the same direction, the bird tucked against the horse's shoulder, as if sheltering there. And in front of them, placed like an offering before an altar, the coin. Tobias's coin, the one Everett had carried for 12 years. The one that had somehow passed from Everett's pocket to Silas's hand, though Wren could not imagine when or how. Silas was leaving it behind, leaving everything behind: the carvings and the coin and the two people they represented. He was going, Leaving the mountain, leaving Everett, leaving her. Wren's chest tightened. She picked up the coin. It was warm from being held. She picked up the two wooden animals, one in each hand, the horse and the bird, and she held them and felt the weight of what they meant. This man's entire heart carved into 2 inches of birch and placed on a windowsill because he could not put it into words. She put the carvings in her coat pocket, put the coin beside them, and ran. She found him at the fork in the trail, the place where the south path led down the mountain toward Lexington, and the north path curved along the ridge toward the higher peaks. He stood with his rucksack on his shoulders, his face toward the south trail, his body oriented toward departure. And Parrish stood in front of him. The stallion had followed Silas from the barn and positioned himself across the south trail like a gate made of muscle and bone. He stood broadside, filling the narrow path between the rock face on one side and the drop on the other. His ears were forward, his eyes were fixed on Silas. His body was perfectly still, the absolute stillness of a horse that has decided it is not going to move, and no force short of dynamite will change its mind. When Silas stepped left, Parrish stepped left. When Silas stepped right, Parrish stepped right. The horse was blocking him the way a mother blocks a doorway, not with aggression, but with presence, with the sheer physical fact of being there and refusing to be anywhere else. Silas stood on the trail with his rucksack and his guilt and his silence, and in front of him stood the horse that 6 months ago would not let a human within 20 feet, the horse that had been hurt and scarred and abandoned, the horse that had decided against every instinct to trust one person, and then through that trust to extend tolerance to one more. And this horse was now using its body to say the only thing it knew how to say: "You are not leaving." Wren stopped 20 feet behind Silas. She did not run to him. She did not call his name. She stood on the trail and she breathed, and she waited because she had spent her entire life learning that the worst thing you can do to a frightened creature is chase it, and the best thing you can do is be still and let it know you are there. "If you go," she said, and her voice was steady, not loud, not pleading, the same voice she used in the paddock, the same calm she used with Parrish. "Then I will stay here, with Everett, with the horses, on this mountain, alone if I have to." She paused. Let the fog carry her words forward. "I will not hold you. I have never held anyone. I did not hold Parrish. I did not hold you. That is not how I work. If you leave because you choose to leave, I will let you go." Another pause. The fog drifted between them like something breathing. "But if you stay not because I am asking, but because you choose to, then I will be here. Every day, the way I have been here every day since I arrived, until you believe that I am not going to leave." The same words she could have said to Parrish, the same method, the same patience, the same willingness to stand in one place for as long as it takes and let the frightened thing come to its own conclusion. Silas stood with the rucksack on his shoulders and the horse in front of him and the woman behind him. The fog moved. The mountains waited. A hawk circled somewhere above the cloud layer, invisible, its shadow passing over the trail like a dark hand. Then slowly Silas shrugged the rucksack off his right shoulder, then his left. The pack hit the ground with a soft sound of canvas and finality. He did not turn around. He stood facing the trail he was not going to take, and his shoulders dropped and his head bowed, and something in his posture shifted from the rigidity of a man who is forcing himself to leave to the exhaustion of a man who has been given permission to stay. Parrish snorted, stepped forward, pressed his muzzle against Silas's chest the first time the horse had ever initiated contact with him. Silas put his hand on the stallion's neck, and the hand was trembling, and the horse did not flinch. Wren turned and walked back toward the cabin. She did not look over her shoulder. To look back would be to check, and to check would be to doubt, and she would not doubt him. She would trust him to follow the way she had trusted Parrish, to come closer one day at a time, one step at a time in his own time. She heard him behind her. 40 seconds after she started walking, she heard his boots on the trail, not close, 20 paces back, the same distance he had kept when she first arrived, as if the counter had reset, as if they were starting over from the beginning. But this time both of them understood where the path was leading. Wren found Everett in the late afternoon. He sat on the flat rock at the edge of the meadow, his back to the cabin, his shoulders rounded, his blanket across his knees. The coin was in his open palm. He was looking at it the way a man looks at a photograph of someone who has died twice. Wren sat beside him, did not speak. Sat the way she sat in the paddock, the way she sat in the barn, the way she had sat with every frightened and wounded creature she had ever known, quietly with her body turned slightly away so that she was present but not confrontational, close but not crowding there, but not demanding. 5 minutes. The wind moved through the meadow grass. A pair of crows argued in the tree line. The fog was lifting for the first time in days, and the mountains were becoming visible again. Ridge after ridge, blue and gray and green, stretching to the horizon like waves frozen in stone. "He killed my brother," Everett said. His voice was flat, drained, the voice of a man who has been screaming internally for 2 days and has nothing left. Wren nodded. "You knew." "I found out the same night you did. When Briggs said it, I heard everything from inside the barn." Everett looked at the coin, turned it. The copper caught the afternoon light. Wren spoke, not in a rush, not pleading. Each word chosen the way she chose her steps in the paddock, carefully aware that one wrong move could send everything running. "You lost your brother at Shiloh. You lost him again 2 nights ago. I am not going to tell you to forgive. I am not going to tell you to stay." She let the silence hold. "But I want to ask you something." Everett did not look up. "Silas stopped speaking 8 years ago, not right after the battle, 2 years after. He stopped because you came up this mountain, and every night you talked about Tobias. Every story you told was a wound he could not close. So he closed his mouth instead. He built himself a prison out of silence, and he lived inside it for 8 years, and it was not a punishment the world gave him. It was a punishment he gave himself." She looked at the mountains. 2 nights ago, a man was about to open the barn door where I was hiding. Silas was the only person close enough to stop him. But to stop him, Silas had to do the one thing he had sworn he would never do again. He had to use his voice. He had to break open the prison he built for himself, and he knew that once he spoke, everything would come undone. The silence was holding the secret in place, and the secret was holding you in place, and if the silence broke, the secret would break, and you would break, and he would lose you. She turned to look at Everett's profile. He knew all of that, and he screamed anyway. Not because he wanted to be free, because I was behind that door. Silence. Long. Heavy. He chose my life over his secret. He chose saving me over keeping you. And now he is back there in that barn, starving because he believes he has lost the only family he has. She paused. "I am not telling you what to do. I am asking you one question. If Tobias could see all of this, if he could look down from wherever he is and see the two of you on this mountain, what would he want you to do?" She did not say another word. She sat beside Everett on the rock and she watched the fog lift from the mountains. And she waited because waiting was what she did. Because waiting was the only thing she had ever been truly good at. And because she had learned from horse and from silence, and from a man who spoke in carved wood, that the most important decisions are never made in the moment of asking. They are made in the silence that comes after. She stood up, walked back toward the cabin, left Everett alone with the pain and the question and the mountains. Dawn, the 3rd morning. The fog came back as it always did, rolling down the Blue Ridge slopes and pooling in the meadow and around the cabin and the barn. It was the same fog that had been there the night Wren arrived, the night she heard the singing for the first time, the night she opened a barn door and found a man who was supposed to be mute, pouring his voice into the ears of a wounded horse. That fog had hidden things. This fog revealed them. Everett walked through it. He came from the meadow, from his rock, from his 2 days of silence. Then he walked through the pond to the barn the way a man walks to a place he has decided to go, not quickly, not slowly, with the measured pace of someone who has weighed something heavy and set it down and picked it up and set it down again and finally chosen to carry it. He pushed open the barn door. Silas sat in the back stall. He had not moved. His eyes were red, his face gaunt, his body folded in on itself like a man trying to take up as little space as possible, as if he could make himself small enough to disappear. Parrish stood in the stall beside him. The stallion's body curved around Silas like a black wall protective present. Everett stood in the barn doorway. The fog drifted in around his legs. The early light came through the cracks in the wall and lay in thin stripes across the floor between them. He looked at Silas. Silas looked up at him with the eyes of a man who has accepted every possible outcome and fears all of them equally. Everett spoke. His voice was calm, not the calm of peace, the calm of a man who has fought a war inside himself and reached the other side not uninjured but alive. I have known since the second year. The words hit Silas like a physical force. His head came up, his eyes widened, his mouth opened and no sound came out, as if the 8 years of silence had one final hold on him and were not letting go without a fight. I found the court-martial papers in your rucksack, Everett said. You hid them in the bottom under the spare boots. I was looking for a needle to mend a shirt. I found the papers instead. Friendly fire, Battle of Shiloh casualty, Private Tobias Hargrove. He stepped into the barn. 1 step, 2. I have known for 10 years, Silas. I have known every day I cooked you breakfast, and every day I told you about my brother, and every day I talked to you about the weather and the horses and the price of grain. I have known every time I tossed that coin before bed, and every time I called you brother. Silas was not breathing. I did not stay because I forgave you. The words hung in the barn like the dust that floated in the stripes of light. I stayed because if I left, you would die on this mountain alone. And I had already lost one brother. I could not survive losing another. Silas broke. Not the way he had broken 2 nights ago, with the dam bursting and the grief pouring out. This was different. This was quiet. This was a man's face crumpling inward like a house whose foundation has been removed, not with noise, but with a slow structural collapse, the eyes closing, the mouth opening, the sound that came out, not a sob, but a moan, low and continuous. The sound of 12 years of weight being set down by a body that had forgotten it was carrying anything, because the carrying had become indistinguishable from living. He wept the way men who have not wept in years weep, without skill, without grace, without any of the techniques that people develop when they cry regularly. He wept like a child with his whole body, his shoulders shaking, his hands covering his face, his breath coming in hitches and gasps. Parrish stamped his hoof, pushed his muzzle against Silas's shoulder, made a sound low and rumbling the sound horses make when they are gentling something smaller than themselves. Everett walked to Silas and sat down beside him. Not across from him, beside him. Shoulder to shoulder, the way 2 men sit when they have known each other long enough that facing each other is no longer necessary because they have both been looking in the same direction for years. He did not put his arm around Silas. He did not pat his back. He did not say, "It is all right," because it was not all right, and both of them knew it, and pretending otherwise would have been an insult to the boy who died in the bomb, into the 12 years of silence that followed. He simply sat, present, not leaving. Then Everett reached into his pocket and pulled out the coin. He looked at it one last time, turned it in his fingers the way he had turned it 1,000 times, 10,000 times every night for 12 years. Then he reached over and placed it in Silas's open palm. "Keep it," he said. "I held it to remember. But you need to hold it so you do not forget. Those are different things." Silas looked at the coin in his hand. Small, copper. Dark with 12 years of handling. The last thing Tobias Hargrove had touched before he walked into a fog he would not walk out of. His fingers closed around it, slowly, completely. And this time his hand did not open. The old reflex, the phantom trigger grip and release, was finished. He held the coin and he kept holding it, and the holding was not a fist and it was not a weapon. It was a man cradling something he would carry for the rest of his life. That afternoon, Wren stood at the paddock fence and watched the meadow. The horses had returned, all 10 of them drifting back over the past 2 days from whatever forest hollows and mountain trails the fog had scattered them to. They stood in the meadow now, grazing in the late October sun, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. Parrish separated from the herd. He walked toward the fence where Wren stood, and he did not stop at 5 paces, did not stop at 3, did not stop at all. He came to her and lowered his head and pressed his muzzle against her shoulder and breathed warm and damp through the fabric of her coat. She put her hand on his neck, felt the pulse beneath the black coat steady and strong, felt the scar on his flank, the old wound healed over, still there but no longer bleeding. Silas came out of the barn. He stood at the fence 10 feet away. His eyes were red and swollen. His clothes were wrinkled from 3 days of not moving. The coin was in his left pocket over his heart, where Everett had carried it for 12 years. He looked at Wren, looked at Parrish, looked at the way her hand rested on the neck of the horse that had refused every other human being who had ever tried to touch it. And he spoke. His voice was still rough, still cracked, still rusted from disuse, but it was clear. How did you do that? 6 months I tried. 6 months and that horse would not let me within arm's reach. Wren looked at him over the curve of Parrish's neck. I did not tame him. I just stayed every day until he believed I was not going to leave. The space between those words was large enough to hold everything she meant and everything she did not say. And Silas stood in that space and understood that she was not talking about the horse, had never been talking only about the horse, would never be talking only about the horse. He nodded, slowly, and for the first time, he did not walk away. Night, fog, the cabin dark, Wren in her bed, eyes open, listening. It came the way it had come the first night, thin and wandering smoke through cracks. A man's voice, low, warm, breaking at the high notes. Barbara Allen, the same song, the same voice, the same barn. But this time underneath the first voice she heard a second, deeper, rougher, off-key by a full step, and not caring, not trying to match the melody, but simply occupying the same musical space the way two men occupy the same cabin, not in harmony but in proximity, not in perfection but in presence. Everett was singing with Silas. He did not know the tune. He did not know the words. He rumbled along beneath the melody like a bass string vibrating in sympathy with a higher one, and the sound they made together was not beautiful. It was better than beautiful. It was real. Wren smiled. She put her feet on the coal floor, pulled the wool coat around her shoulders, lifted the iron latch, the one that locked from the inside, the one Everett had installed on her first day, tested twice to make sure it caught. She crossed the cabin in bare feet, opened the front door, stepped into the fog, the same fog, the same grass, the same path down the slope, past the woodpile, past the well, past the fence post. The same barn door half open, the same amber light from the same lantern. She pushed the door, looked in. Two men sat on the straw against the far wall, Silas on the left, Everett on the right, shoulder to shoulder. Parrish lay beside them, his great black body curled on the straw, his tail flicking once, twice his ears turned toward the singing. Silas saw her in the doorway. He did not freeze. He did not stop singing. He did not show terror or shame or the desperate need to hide. He looked at her, and his gray eyes held something she had not seen in them before, something that was not fear and was not guilt and was not the terrible blankness of a man in hiding. It was room. He was making room. He shifted to the left, his shoulder leaving a space between himself and Everett, a space exactly the width of a woman who had come a long way to find a place where she was not the eldest daughter, not the caretaker, not the one who stayed behind, but simply a person who had been chosen not out of obligation or necessity, but out of something quieter and stronger and harder to name. Wren sat down. Her shoulder touched Silas's shoulder. Silas's shoulder touched Everett's shoulder. Three people on a pile of straw in a barn on a mountain in the Blue Ridge, in October, in fog, in the 8th year of one man's silence, and the first night of its end. The song continued. 3 voices now. Wren's was soft and clear, the melody her mother had sung in a kitchen in Pennsylvania a lifetime ago. Silas's was broken and warm. Everett's was rough and wrong and absolutely present. Parrish closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. His ears, the ears that had been pinned back against every human being for years, were forward, turned toward the singing like satellite dishes aimed at a signal they had finally found. On the windowsill inside the cabin, the wooden horse and the wooden bird stood side by side, facing east, waiting for morning. That winter, the United States Army received 22 horses at its depot in Staunton, Virginia, 2 more than the contract required. Parrish led them down the mountain trail in a line, his black coat shining in the November sun, his scar a white thread on his flank. Silas rode him. It was the first time the stallion had allowed anyone on his back, and he carried Silas the way he did everything, not because he had been broken, but because he had chosen. The quartermaster at Staunton looked at Silas and said, "You mute." Everett, standing beside the lead horse, grinned. A wide grin, the kind that fills a room, the kind that makes strangers feel like old friends. He only talks when it is worth talking. Most days it is not. The money from the horse contract bought flour and salt pork and ammunition and sugar in a bolt of blue fabric that Wren did not ask for, but that appeared in the supply wagon when they loaded up for the trip back up the mountain. Everett claimed he had no idea how it got there. Silas said nothing, but his right hand, the one with the burn scar, rested briefly on the bolt of fabric as they unloaded and his fingers touched the blue cloth, the way a man touches something he has chosen for someone but will never admit to choosing. That spring, the cabin on the Blue Ridge had a new room. Everett built the frame and walls. Silas did the roof and the finish work, planing the wood smooth, fitting the joints so tight that winter would not find a crack to enter. Wren chose the location, the east side, where the window would catch the first light of morning, where she could lie in bed and watch the sun come up over the ridge and hear, if she listened carefully, the sound of horses breathing in the meadow below. On the windowsill of the new room, two wooden animals stood side by side, a horse and a bird, both carved from pale birch, both facing east, both catching the morning light. And every night from the barn below the cabin, a man sang to the horses. His voice was low and warm, and it still broke at the high notes because some things in a person cannot be fixed. They can only be used. And a broken note is still a note, and a broken man is still a man. And a song sung badly by three people who have chosen each other is worth more than any song ever sung perfectly by one person alone. There are men who stay silent not because they have nothing to say, but because the thing they need to say would destroy everything they are trying to hold together. And there are men who hear the silence and stay anyway, not because forgiveness is easy, but because leaving is impossible. And there are women who stand in fields with wild horses day after day, patient as weather, stubborn as stone, until the thing that was broken decides on its own that it is ready to be whole. Nobody on that mountain used the word forgive. Forgiveness is a word for outsiders. The people on the mountain used a different word. Stay. It was enough.